Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Skibby. I'm a principal practice leader for AWS Security Assurance Services, LLC. If you've never heard of AWS Security Services, I'd like to share with you that we are a subsidiary of AWS, and we help our customers with very specific compliance guidance. We help customers build, automate, and scale their AWS environment with compliance in mind. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Carl for an intro.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carl Mathis. I'm a senior privacy architect. I work for Jessie on the AWS Security Assurance Services team.
All right. I was supposed to be holding the clicker. All right. So just a really quick legal disclaimer. We are not attorneys, and we are not providing legal advice today. So today, what are we going to talk about today? So we're talking about building privacy compliance on AWS. We're going to take you through some risks and challenges, and there's been a lot happening this week, as you guys have. This is day 5 of reInvent, so you know there's a lot going on. So you have a lot of options as far as AWS services and features and actually how to build your environment to meet various security and privacy requirements. So we're going to talk a lot about those risks and responsibilities and challenges. Of course, we can't talk about this topic without at least mentioning briefly the shared responsibility model. And then, of course, like I said, we're going to get a lot into services and features. Carl's going to take you through lots of different architectural diagrams, kind of sharing with you the art of the possible and hopefully help you think about how privacy engineering concepts can help you as you're building and scaling your privacy program. Yeah.
When you go through this, can you call out which services are available for GovCloud and which ones are not?
That's a really great question. So when we're able to, we'll definitely try to mention those that are applicable to GovCloud. And then, of course, lots of time we're going to spend on some specific customer challenges. As I failed to mention earlier, but wanted to share with you, I mean, this is what Carl and I do for our customers today. So we get lots of inquiry on specific challenges. So what we're bringing to you today are some of those most common challenges and how we propose solving them. There's, of course, lots of different ways to solution, and we're going to share with you a few to kind of demonstrate that art of the possible. So why are we here talking about this? And there's lots of different pressure, lots of different requirements from a business standpoint, but I want to take you down to something personal for me, and I know Carl feels very passionate about this as well, but privacy really is a personal issue, right? The why we're here and what we're doing. It's because I, as an individual, if I'm going to share my information with an organization, with a company I'm doing business with, I want to feel that I can trust them to keep my information secure and private. So make it personal. Look around the room. Privacy is an issue for all of us. So it's not only the right thing to do for the organization that we're going to share with you, it's the right thing to do for people in general. So today, as of the last time I checked the news, there's a little over 130 privacy laws internationally. So think about that as you're scaling your business globally, how difficult it is to navigate all of those different privacy regulations. So it's a very complex, evolving, and expanding issue across to our customer base worldwide. And it's not changing. It's not stopping there, right? It's continuing to evolve and change. So there's a highly dynamic security and privacy threat landscape. And because there is so much data obviously out there, threat actors are getting much more intelligent in trying to get that data. So a mix of precise and vague requirements. Like it's very difficult to read through the requirements and understand exactly what to do. So there's a lot of interpretation and a lot of vagueness within the requirements that we're facing today. So that just adds a layer of complexity. And depending on where you are in your organization, you may not have the necessary alignment with your legal privacy engineering teams. There's many times we find within our customers, there's a lot of silos that are built. So we're looking for ways to incorporate privacy engineering principles that will break some of those silos.
Yeah, and I would just add that when we talk about the nebulousness of privacy, we're all familiar with the term privacy by design. We're all familiar with the term privacy by default. But does anybody know what that really means? I mean, there's like 7 principles, but how do you translate those principles into actual privacy engineering, right? And that's kind of where we come in, is we help with that translation process of taking of actually making operationalizing what privacy by design is and privacy by default really means.
That's a good point. So like I mentioned, we need to talk about the shared responsibility model because there is a clear difference in your on-premises environment and when you choose to move those workloads to the cloud. So I feel like this is a very common picture. Hopefully many of you are familiar with this, but today, if your environment is on premises, you're responsible for everything, right? That's just the way that works. And when you move into AWS in a cloud environment, you have that shared responsibility model that comes into play where AWS manages and controls the security of the cloud, and you are responsible for security in the cloud. So we're talking about shared responsibility, we're talking about security, but what about privacy? What about privacy in the cloud? Carl, is there anything you want to talk about there?
Privacy in the cloud is also a shared responsibility, right? So we have a variety of artifacts that you can use for security of the cloud. You can go look at our asset stations, but there's also privacy in the cloud, which is where the collaboration between AWS and our customers really comes to the forefront, right? Where you implement or you you look through a very dedicated privacy lens at your architectures and your environments, and you work with AWS to help implement privacy controls that meet your defined requirements.
Right, and this is an idea of what that shared responsibility model looks like. The orange, of course, is AWS. The blue on the top is the customer, and we're going to talk in a minute how that line kind of changes depending on which services and the model of those services you're utilizing. But I know Carl mentioned some artifacts and some things that you can use as you're building out your privacy program. So for example, the ISO certifications that AWS maintains, the 27701, 27017, 27018, and of course, I think maybe more clearly, the CISP document that you can download, the certification that you can download to show specifically some privacy issues that you're looking at related to GDPR in a lot of cases.
You can actually go to the CISP website now, and it has all the list of AWS services which are now approved, and it's more than 52. I don't have the exact number, but we just got a whole new slate which were approved during this week at reInvent.
Right, and that's it. Hopefully that comes together for you in your mind, that there are things that AWS is managing that you can leverage to support your program, but it really is still your responsibility to have that oversight and to do that check and balance. The same way it's your responsibility to have a similar or concept of a shared responsibility model in place with other vendors, business partners, or even customers. As you think through how do you manage privacy end to end, it really is a shared responsibility model between you and those business partners that you're working with.
Yeah, Jesse, and I think that's a very good point, that not only do you have the shared responsibility with AWS, but you really should look at how can you have a shared responsibility with your business partners, your vendors, and even your own customers, right? Because it is a partnership moving forward.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, the line does vary depending on, I'll just bring this whole slide up because I want to move quickly through this and get to the really good stuff that Carl is going to present with the actual services and solutions to help support you. But I think it is important to remember this, that the line of responsibility does vary depending on the service. So it really is important to understand that as you're incorporating these in your environment.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways from this slide is you can take the shared responsibility lens and apply it to the services that you use, right? So if you're using EC2, which is our elastic compute, how does the shared responsibility work in EC2 as opposed to S3, which is a more managed service in AWS? So keep that in mind when you're looking and looking at the various AWS services.
All right, so security and privacy. You know, it's interesting that Carl and I are both in an organization within AWS called Global Services Security, and really leading this privacy initiative. One question that I personally get quite a bit, and depending on what your role is, you might have to do this type of explaining too, but is the security sufficient, the security program that you have in place today, is it sufficient for privacy? If you're a privacy professional, you understand the answer to that is no. There's obviously a distinct variance. But it's something that you may need to get comfortable with explaining or even understand yourself so you can understand the difference. So the way we kind of describe this is we think about security as our traditional confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But with privacy, you have linkability, identifiability, and then also when you think about the data subjects, their access rights, consent, notice, choice. So there's a lot of things that sit on top of security that are security being very foundational to your privacy program, but not comprehensive, not going to achieve that privacy compliance that you're looking for.
Yeah, when we work with customers, one of the first things we look at is, do they have a minimum security baseline? Do they have that foundation? It's not to say that you have to have everything, but there are certain core security methodologies and technologies and processes that you need to have in place because privacy is going to leverage those.
Right, but it's a very different and unique topic where security engineering alone will not satisfy those requirements. You really do need to be thinking in terms of a privacy engineering mindset, which is what we're sharing with you today. So we're going to get into some very specific services and features that will help support your underlying security, of course, and the privacy that we're talking about today. So this is a very busy slide. However, it's a really great slide to kind of categorize these into different subjects that you're hearing. So data minimization, data-centric design, disclosure control, continuous oversight, and individual autonomy. And since this is, one of Carl's favorite topics, I wanted to pass it over to Carl. Share with us a couple of your favorites, maybe some of the things that we work with customers today that are overlooked, right? Things that people don't realize there's a connection there. And then also, there's a bunch of new things, exciting things that were announced this week. So, Carl?
So I must confess that we're getting to the part of the presentation. I'm a tech guy. So my passion for this is really going to start to come out, and I may let a few dad jokes slide out in the process. So please excuse me. So I love this slide, and I've got two. I love all of these services, but the two that I really think are really important for privacy is Private Link and VPC endpoints, right? Everybody knows about VPC, the gateway endpoints for S3 and DynamoDB, but we've got over 70 other services that utilize interface endpoints. This is a really great way to segment and segregate your data to create zones of trust, okay? It also simplifies your architectures, right? The more complex your architectures, the greater you might miss something. I know we're all professionals, but I myself do miss stuff when it gets really complicated, right? Mm-hmm. We're only human. Another one is Amazon CodeGuru. I love CodeGuru, right? And what CodeGuru is CodeGuru, especially CodeGuru Reviewer, right? It looks inside your code, and it doesn't just look for syntax. It's not that kind. It's not like your IDE, but it looks for data leakage potentials. So in other words, you may have coded something in the upper part of your code. You then code something in the lower part of your code. CodeGuru will say, hey, you bring those two together, and you have a data leakage problem, okay? Now, it already has over 22 algorithms built in to check for specific types of data leakage, and they're adding more, okay? So if you're not using CodeGuru, maybe you should think about adding that to your validation pipeline for your code, right? Because it kind of just slides right in, it flies under the radar, but it really adds a lot of value. Now, there have been some great services that have been released at reInvent this week. One of my favorite one is Amazon Verified Permissions. We have introduced a new language called Cedar. Cedar was developed by AWS, but it's not proprietary. And what it is you can embed it into your applications. You can embed it into our services, where before an action is initiated, it can go and check your business policy database to make sure that that action is allowed and approved, okay? So think about it. You have a database, a business policy database where you've uploaded all your policies. Now you can programmatically check actions on personal information right as it's going through its actual processing. Another service I like is data zones. Data zones, what that does is that provides governance across your entire AWS organizations within that, and it doesn't matter what region it is in, what account it is in, as long as it's under AWS organizations. This also can be acted upon programmatically as well, okay? So think about data zones as this overarching governance structure, more so than control tower, right, for your AWS organization's environment. Now, I say control tower because I'm going to say a little bit about control tower. Control tower just released 200 plus more guardrails. That's huge, okay? That is in preview, okay? If you'd like to be part of that, I highly encourage you to go check that out. So those are just a few of the releases which have come out of this reInvent. That's not, I'll say one more because I'm a fan of AWS Glue. Glue is now updated to version 4, and it adds a quality data component, which has been added to Glue DataBrew. Glue DataBrew is another one of my faves too. Actually, I love them all, but
yeah,
anyway.
we're going to talk more about that later as well.
We'll hint on, we'll actually go into some defined architectures about this, covering some of these later on.
Well, I hope we've kind of already answered this question. Oh, I'm actually pointing the laser at you. I'm so sorry. So hopefully we've already kind of laid the groundwork for why adopt this thought process and this privacy engineering mindset within your organization. Because as Carl just talked about some of his favorite services, think about like traditional models of privacy compliance today compared to how fast you want to innovate and leverage the power of the cloud to move quickly. So what we're going to share with you is obviously some of those reasons on why adopt this, but what we're really here to describe is the art of the possible. Like there's so many of these challenges that can be solved with technical solutions, allowing you to innovate and move faster and break down those silos where you may have legal or compliance wanting to slow things down, obviously, to do all of their checks and balances, which is always going to be necessary, but to be able to tell the story of how the technical solutions are helping support your program is a really powerful thing. And so the very first thing up here, and I know Carl and I have a lively conversation about this, is how does privacy compliance and privacy engineering help you from an innovation standpoint? Like I just talked about it slowing down innovation.
You have to think big, okay? For example, I'll give you a think big scenario. You have multiple policies that apply to a single piece of data. So to think big and to innovate, what do you have to automate? You have to automate hierarchical policy management. Right now, that is probably a manual process, right? If you are going to do privacy at scale, then you have to start thinking big, because you're right, privacy does put some boundaries, but that spurs innovation in my view, right? Because you have to be creative. You have to take all of these manual processes that you have. If you're going to do geographical expansion, if you're going to go into other verticals, and you have to be able to do this at scale, and that's where innovation comes in, right? Is this idea of thinking big, looking ahead, right? What's going to be the next big thing? And in my view, and one of the reasons I'm excited and so passionate about privacy is because for me it drives that, right? Because you have a new set of requirements. You have a new outcome that you want to achieve, right? And status quo isn't going to get you there. That's the flame for innovation.
Yeah, it's also leading to agility, what we were talking about earlier. How do you respond as you're taking your business globally to, like I said, over 130 privacy laws and regulations? So by establishing your own privacy engineering capabilities and following privacy principles, it will allow you to stay more agile as you are looking for what are the delta in the new law or the changes that are coming. So you have to be preparing yourself to be agile in that type of setting because of the ever-changing landscape. So it doesn't, like I said, slow you down, so it leads to innovation.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if you had a privacy minimum baseline in addition to a security minimum baseline? And no matter what vertical you're in, no matter what geography you're in, you can say, hey, we've codified this as code. We want to push this out, right? And that foundation can get you, X percent toward any kind, of the regulatory laws or directives. Then you can really spend your time just looking at those nuanced differences, those deltas, right? Remove that heavy lifting of privacy where you can. And I've talked with hundreds of customers. And the one thing they say is, well, I want to be X compliant, I want to be B compliant, I want to be C compliant. But what happens when they take that approach is it becomes manually intensive, there's a lot of overhead, and they wind up with duplicate controls that end up stepping on each other, and when controls step on each other, holes start to appear, okay? So getting that privacy minimum baseline becomes really, really important.
Yeah, and I promise just a couple more business benefits, and we're going to get into the really fun technical stuff that you're all here for. But we do see there's data demonstrating shorter sales cycle, and again, this kind of goes back to the very foundational, like I mentioned earlier, it's a personal thing, it's about trust. And whether it's company to company, business to business, business to consumer trust, allowing your business to grow, and we're going to share with you some data here in a second. Fewer silos, more collaboration within the company is super, super important. That combined skill set of somebody who understands the legal risk involved with privacy, and also that privacy engineer who understands how to mitigate that risk with the right controls. It's a really interesting combination of skill set, and so breaking down those silos is really, really important. And so speaking of data, I do want to share with you, this is the last kind of high-level business benefit. So if you are a business leader in the room, and you're trying to figure out how much should I invest in privacy, and is this, it's kind of a risk-reward type of decision as you're thinking about how much to spend and what to invest. This is kind of sharing with you how the Cisco study has shown the return on investment. So the ultimate tangible outcome here in investing in privacy is this return on investment that's been proven. And so the 50% of customers see an average of 1 to 2 times return on investment. So for what they're investing in privacy, they are seeing that up to 2 times return.
And I think what's also important about this slide, if you look at the top 7%, where it goes from 3x to 5x, that's grown over the last 4 years, right? So for every dollar that you're spending, you're getting 2 to 5x return, and that's 15% of that. So privacy pays off. There is a rate of return on privacy now.
Yeah. So if you're that person who is within your organization as passionate about Carl and I, take this data and use it when you're talking with the business stakeholders, because there's a definite added value to your business to investing in privacy. All right, so I'm going to turn the clicker over to you, Carl, where you're going to start talking about some specific customer challenges.
Yep, thank you, Jesse. So I just want to tell you, I want to take a minute to tell you why I'm so passionate about privacy and why privacy trust is so important to me. When my son was playing Little League Baseball, we were all going to go to Cooperstown, and he wanted to raise money, right? And one of the other parents said, well, there's this new social media site. We're going to put all our information up there, and then we're going to raise some money. And I did some research and said, I don't think so. So what got me interested in privacy was that trust, was protecting my children and my family. And that's why I am so passionate about this. It has a personal meaning for me, right? And that's why I want to share what I know and how I feel about privacy with you. So just to kind of give you some background there. Oh, we're already at continuous oversight. So we're going to talk about continuous oversight first. Now, what do I mean by continuous oversight? I mean observability, monitoring, logging, right? And we're going to start with an example. Since you're here at reInvent, you probably know what CloudTrail logs are, right? CloudTrail logs are that's the governance mechanism for capturing all API calls, or most API calls in AWS. Now, when you configure CloudTrail, you can have it do one region or all regions. You can also have it have multiple regions into one S3 bucket, or multiple accounts into one other account's S3 bucket. Now, when you think about this from a privacy perspective, are there any things that kind of pop up into your head? Well, one thing is, there's cross-border data transfers. Because if you're collecting all regions and putting them into one bucket, or all accounts and putting them into one bucket, you think, well, okay, there's a cross-border data transfer. The next thing is, could there possibly be personal information which is by default collected in your CloudTrail logs? Let me think about this. There's IP address, which could be. There's name, which could be. And there's probably some other combination of elements that in the aggregate could be, right? Based on regulation and based on source jurisdiction, right? So we may have to implement something in order to redact that information if we are going to move that to a centralized CloudTrail bucket, right? Now, just because there's PI in there doesn't mean that you can't use centralization with CloudTrail. Now, we're going to talk about some ways to solve this problem, but I want to make it clear up front that these are ways that myself and other team members have come up with. This is not an exhaustive list, right? Again, it's being creative. It's bringing new services to bear, right? So here's one way that you can solve that problem, okay? Amazon Kinesis Data Firehose. So what are we doing with this? Well, we know that we can take CloudTrail logs and we can stream them to Kinesis. We know that we can take CloudWatch logs and EventBridge, stream them to Kinesis. Well, what can you do with Kinesis Firehose? Well, you can transform inline. And what that means is that you can make API calls to say comprehend, so it can manage and detect the PI, which is in those log files. And then you could also engage a Lambda function to redact that data inline, so that by the time it reaches that centralized bucket, guess what? It's all taken care of for you, okay? Now, this isn't the only way that you can do this. Another possible way is an S3 Lambda access point, right? So you could do it before it gets to the S3 bucket, or you can do it as it's entering the S3 bucket. The point from both of those is that it's taken care of before it's written to the S3 bucket. And that's what's important, okay? Now, when I talk about redaction, I'm using that as a very generic term, right? Another generic term would be de-identification, right? You can use masking, you can use suppression, whatever you feel comfortable with, you can implement. And we help customers go through the whole gamut and implement a lot of this stuff. Now, you talked about all over reInvent this week has been zero trust, right? Zero trust, zero trust, zero trust. Well, an implementation and engineering of zero trust is zones of trust. And one way how you can implement zones of trust is with IAM Access Analyzer. IAM Access Analyzer will not only evaluate your IAM policies, your S3 bucket policies, and combine them together to give you an evaluation of the end result, but it will also let you preview the policies before they're deployed. You can also combine IAM Access Analyzer with guard duty to detect anomalous behavior at your S3 bucket, right? Now, you may have an S3 bucket policy that you think is secure, but you also may have an IAM policy which interacts with that, which makes it not quite so secure. IAM Access Analyzer will actually find that for you. Now, the other thing that IAM Access Analyzer does, which was just added, is that it will also tell you usage of a service, last time the service was accessed. Now, how can you use that? Well, you can pull that information programmatically, and you can use that to adjust permissions on the fly in the policy, right? So you can titrate it down. You can narrow the permissions on the fly based on actual real-time data. That's some really cool stuff. Now we're going to talk about data minimization. Well, what do I mean by data minimization? Well, data minimization really means you're only collecting, processing the data that you need, okay? You're not just going out and saying, hey, I'm going to collect everything I can get, and then I'll pick and choose, okay? You're going to say, I know ahead of time what I need for X, Y, Z, and that's what I'm going to stick with. So how can you implement data minimization? I love this, and this works so cool, okay? Let's say that you have an EC2 instance that has a CloudWatch logs agent on it, right? And I know that we don't do this, but this is a hypothetical. Somebody may be putting PI in application logs. I know we don't do it, but there's probably somebody out there that has inadvertently miscoded something. You want to make sure that that PI is in the application log, it's not stored that way. So what can you do? You can use your logging utility, which collects that. It can send an API call to Comprehend. Comprehend can come in, and Comprehend can then detect that PI in that log, and then Comprehend is getting the, Comprehend can either do the redaction, or you can call a Lambda function to do the redaction. But what's happening is this is going on in memory, okay? The log file is not written yet, okay? The redaction takes place before the log file is written, then that redacted PI is sent over to EventBridge or CloudWatch logs, then goes into your S3 bucket. But what else could you do as a secondary validation? You could put an access point on that S3 bucket just to verify that the PI data is actually gone with another Lambda function, okay? Now, let's just think about another way where you can do that, right? You could use Lambda at edge on CloudFront and do the same thing if, globally, right? So you've got all these different ways and all these different solutions that you can implement in order to minimize the data that you're ingesting into your systems. Now, you may or may not recognize this. We have a workshop that is publicly available that you can walk through on the AWS website, okay? One of the AWS websites, we have many. And what is called is Wild Rides. Now, we have implemented this, and all the names up here have been changed to protect the innocent, okay? So this is not the actual name of the company or the actual application for that matter. But let's say that you have a ride-sharing app, okay, something that's common. Well, when that person signs up for that ride-sharing app, to create the account, they're going to give you first name, last name, they're going to give you an email address, then they're going to be given a token, they're going to have to come back in, sign in, they'll get a consent that they have to consent to, and you're going to capture all that information. So you're already in the realm of personal information already, right? So you want to be able, now remember that consent is dynamic. People can come back in and update their consent. They can give you the consent and they can take it away, okay? And as soon as they take it away, you need to change your behavior accordingly. So you need some kind of ledger that is dynamic, but that also keeps all the historical records. And once they're historical records, then they need to be immutable. Well, what can you use for that? DynamoDB. Now, DynamoDB is one source, but we have others. Quantum Ledger Database, Managed Blockchain. When I say immutable ledgers, those are things that come to my mind, right? Now, once you have that consent ledger in DynamoDB, what you can do then is you can use that as a validation point for processing your data. So you have Lambda functions that go back in and check and say, well, what is the current version of the consent? If the current version of consent is okay, then you go ahead, you process that data, you collect the latitude, longitude of the locations, and you take it to the full 14 digits, right? But if they say, no, I don't want you to collect my data, you can still offer them the service, but you take the longitude and latitude and you drop it down from 14 digits to 2 digits, right? You make it more broad, right, and not specific to them. And you can see in this, for this particular customer, they had a third-party analytics group that was located in Europe where they would send all the historical data for analysis, right? So that they could determine if they needed more drivers in a certain location, right? Now, if the person changes their consent about being sent over, then what you can do then is you can say, okay, we will, from the consent table, we will actually delete that and prevent that information from being sent over. We can also say that when we're sending the data over, they don't need all 14 digits, we could bring it down to 6. Now, one question that can come up is somebody can say, well, wait a minute, you have to somehow keep track of who I am, right? And then if I withdraw my consent, how do you make sure that all the information which you've already given to that data analytics provider that is removed from there without giving away who I am? One-way hash, right? A one-way hash breaks the linkability and identifiability. So you send that over with a one-way hash, and then when you remove the data, you send it over, you say all the data associated with this one-way hash needs to be removed. Now, that's complicated, but the big takeaway from this is that you have to start looking at your workloads with a very nuanced approach of privacy, okay? For example, when we started talking and looking about this third party, right, we have to give them the information, but how can we do it in such a way where we break linkability, break identifiability? When you start talking about segmentation and segregation, right, I had a conversation with a customer and they said, yes, we segment all of our data into 3 separate databases. I went and looked in there, but 40 people had access to the role that actually had access to all 3 databases. That doesn't break linkability. Now you have an aggregation problem, okay? So you want to make sure that you're thinking nuanced about the workloads.
I was doing that earlier.
Okay. Individual autonomy. Now what do I mean by individual autonomy? Well, you can say, well, what I mean is data subjects' rights. But I mean a broader category than that, right? What I mean is the ability of the data subject to make a decision without interference, right? It's much more broader than just data subject rights. So we're talking about bias, right? We're talking about other things that can inhibit a data subject. But we're not going to go down that broad. What we're going to do is we're going to look at a common how can I manage the data quality of my personal information that I have, okay? Now, this is, when we created this slide, this was one of the ways that you can check for quality automation. You can use Glue DataBrew to set up data quality rules, and you can, so then you can stream, when you collect that data, you can send it through AWS Glue DataBrew, which is part of the Glue portfolio. You can send it through Event Bridge, and then the Lambda function will check to see if any of those data quality rules that you've set up in DataBrew have been violated. If they have, it will send a notification to you, okay? Or you could even have an automated workflow where it will remove that data, or send an email out to the data subject, can we refresh that data, right? However, at reInvent this week, they added the capability in Glue to actually scan your data and make recommendations for data quality rules. Now, you don't have to accept them, but I've actually looked at the process, and it's actually very, very good, okay? Not perfect, but it's good, right? So they have good recommendations right off the bat. So this isn't the only way you can do this, and now you have another option where, again, AWS has tried to remove a lot of the heavy lifting from you. There we go. And then here, I know that we as organizations get requests from data subjects. I want to know what data you have on me, okay? I want you to send it to me in a file, or as the regulations call it, machine readable, right? Well, how can you do that in AWS? Well, now with Glue version 4, which is faster and more efficient, you can use Glue crawlers to go and crawl your data, capture all that metadata, even have it create through an ETL function a hash so that you don't know who the data belongs to. Then that data can be stored in an S3 bucket. Then the user can log in on a mobile app or a portal, have an account set up incognito, get their hash value, and then they can retrieve that information, okay? So now you have an automated way where users can come get a list of the information that you have about them. Okay? Now, this takes a manual process and automates it, which means now you can do this at scale. There are other data subjects' rights where you could do this, right to be forgotten or right to erasure. Okay? So this, like I said, this is just one example of how you can move forward. Disclosure control. Now, when we talk about disclosure control, we're really talking about security, right? Or really security focused. And I kind of gave you a preview of earlier, but this is Amazon CodeGuru, right? And what we're really focusing on here is Amazon CodeGuru Reviewer and its ability to really deep dive and make connections into your code. And CodeGuru is kind of misunderstood. People go and they read the description for CodeGuru, and they come away thinking that it's a syntax engine like an IDE, and that's not anywhere close, right? So I'm out here, I guess I'm a CodeGuru champion, so to speak, and I'm here, trying to raise the awareness for CodeGuru, how you can slide it in to your pipelines, right? And how you can actually raise the bar on your privacy. You can use it to implement a minimum privacy baseline within your environment, in your code. And this ties directly into the next slide, which is code signing with AWS Signer. We know how important production code is. We lock down our production environments. We don't allow people direct access. There's a break glass procedure. We protect them because they are the crown jewels. Well, one added layer of privacy protection is once you have code which has gone through all of the appropriate scanning, vulnerability checks, data leakage checks, then you can use AWS Signer to sign that code, right? So that then when it goes to be deployed, a Lambda function validates that it's gone through by the sign, by the signature. That's another level of validation. So what we're getting at here, and what a common theme is through all of this, is validation. Making sure that things are done appropriately, and that things are done as you expect them, okay? And that's what this all comes down to, is to automate at scale and make sure that you have processes and procedures and automation in place to validate, right? And that's where we go back to this whole idea of innovation and thinking big. Back over to you, Jesse.
I wanted to remind you, Carl, too, we had a question over there about any of this applicability to GovCloud. I mean, is there anything that you mentioned so far that you could think of being?
Previews, things which are in preview are not in GovCloud. So if you go and you look at services which are in preview, they're not going to be available in GovCloud, okay? Now, if you look at anything which is in GA, it's probably not going to be in GovCloud yet, but it's probably on the roadmap for GovCloud. Everything which is deployed that comes out of GA goes to US East 1 first, right? And then there'll be some regions over in Europe. But all of the basic services like Glue DataBrew, being able to implement VPC endpoints, all those basic services should be available in GovCloud.
All right, so I can't believe we're on time, Carl. I really can't. And I didn't hear any dad jokes, so I don't know where those are. So what we want to kind of conclude with is some resources for you, a call to action. And the message we hope you heard pretty loud and clear is that we believe privacy is a positive-sum game. Integrating your privacy engineering principles into your entire data lifecycle management, investing in privacy engineering, and bringing that technical aspect of solutioning some of these very manual, very time-consuming issues. Hopefully, if you take away anything, there's some art of the possible on how building the right technology solution can help you solve some of those proactive issues. So being proactive, define privacy requirements within your regulated workloads. It's a necessary to expand your business globally, right? You all know that. It's probably why you're here. You need solutions. You need things that will help you as your business is looking at scaling and growing and protecting. And there are ways to codify and automate privacy as code using AWS services such as Amazon Comprehend and AWS Glue. I did want to also mention too, there were several diagrams that Carl walked you through. I think Comprehend might have been one of them, where there's some public-facing blogs and some articles where there's code samples and much more detailed description. So I can imagine some of you walking away from the session today, it's super hard to contain it all and say, where do I go get more information? There's definitely lots of different blog articles and resources out there for you, which we're going to get into here, talking about a few more resources. Again, using the AWS Artifact tool, there is the ability to go in and download these various certifications. Again, this goes back to the shared responsibility model and the importance of you as our customers being able to inherit those controls that AWS maintains so that you can put together your holistic privacy program. So I'm not going to name all these, but here's the certifications on the list. Here are the things that we thought were most helpful as you're building your privacy program.
And I would actually go back and say that you can look at tools that you may not think that you would normally use, right? For example, people think of Amazon Comprehend, right? But they don't necessarily think of Amazon Comprehend as being able to help with privacy, right? When you say scanning for PI or picking up PI, people automatically think of Macy. So you can start looking at other services and trying to determine, do they have a component that you could leverage to help enhance your privacy minimum baseline?
So some of the new and updated resources that we do want to share, like I mentioned, this is obviously a continuously changing landscape. So the Data Privacy Center, that is information publicly available on the AWS website, this is the short list. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are the things we wanted to share with you as you're building your privacy program, some of the things that we thought were most helpful. I say we, but I really mean Carl. Carl is so deep in this every single day working with our customers, and this is the most comprehensive and helpful list. And the GDPR Center, of course, is a great resource for all of you. And again, diving deep into what are those privacy enhancing features of the different AWS services. We really just scratched the surface today. There's so much potential for you to build your solutions.
And I just thought of an example of looking at an AWS service through a privacy lens, right? So we talked a little bit about DynamoDB, right? Well, DynamoDB global tables, DynamoDB streams, right? When you start to use Amazon DynamoDB tables, you're going cross-jurisdiction, right? DynamoDB streams goes cross-jurisdiction. So it crosses boundaries. So when you start looking at services, put on that privacy hat when you're looking at the services. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use them, but it's just things you should be aware of, right? It's those nuances that you need to, and it really takes looking at AWS and looking at what we can provide through that privacy lens.
Right, and with that concludes our session today. I wanted to thank all of you for your attention. I know this is the last day of reInvent, and this is not necessarily an easy topic to consume and to take away. Feel free to Carl or myself. We're definitely here to help. For more information about AWS Security Assurance Services, we do have a link here. Of course, that is something you can search online as well. And please don't forget to complete your session survey in the mobile app. If there's any feedback you have for us, we would love to hear that. And I know Carl and I are going to hang out. We're ending a little bit early, so we will be at the back of the room. If anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, we're not going to do a broad Q&A, but we are going to make ourselves available after the session if you have any specific questions. So with that, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.